The Minnesota Vikings are 5-2 after a 30-20 loss to the Rams in Week 8. This was their second loss in 5 days, as they also lost to the Lions with a score of 31-29 in Week 7. After the Lions' loss, it was a lot of, well, it was a close game that could have gone either way, and the Vikings are still a really good team. And basically anybody that can play the Lions, that tough, is almost certainly guaranteed to go to the postseason and be a threat in the conference. And while the postseason part may be true, the Vikings are currently struggling, and it's not just one issue. There's a plethora of issues with this team, and we're going to break them all down in today's video. This is not a reactionary response from the Rams' loss, as this goes back a few weeks, and the moment that I think that really started to unravel was immediately after the Vikings jumped out to a 28-0 lead against the Packers. Yes, they won that game, and they won the following week against the Jets too, but each of those wins were a lot more stressful than they needed to be, and this plays a part into why the Vikings are struggling, and we're going to break everything down in today's video. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by breaking down one of my biggest concerns with the Minnesota Vikings, and it's their offense. The way the Rams game started in Week 8 looked like it was going to be a shootout. It was a 14-14 game with 10 minutes left in the second quarter, as each team had 2 offensive drives and 2 touchdowns to that point. And the Vikings got the ball first, and both of their drives were in the first quarter. They had an 8-play 70-yard drive for a touchdown and a 10-play 70-yard drive for a touchdown. It was a beautiful start to a road game on a short week, in which you played close to the equivalent of a playoff game a few days prior against the Detroit Lions. But here's where my concerns lie with the Vikings, and here's why they're struggling. Minnesota had 3 possessions in the second quarter, and the results were 2 punts and the end of the half. The end of the half drive specifically stunk because they lost franchise left tackle Christian Darrisaw for the year in a really unfortunate sequence of events. Darrisaw tore his ACL and MCL, and it's not an exaggeration to say he was playing at an all-pro level. But the Vikings had 18 plays in the first quarter for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns, and for the remainder of the game, they had 32 plays for 176 yards, and they put up just 6 points. Whether you are playing the Rams, Lions, or the Panthers, you are probably not going to win that game with those numbers. The Panthers maybe, but the point is you have to be better than the initial first 15 to 20 plays, and this is something that has gone back several weeks, excluding the Lions game. Now, I do want to credit Sam Darnold and the offense for how they played in that game in the second half, because it was a lot different than how several other second halves have been played this year. Sam was 13 of 15 in the second half against Detroit and threw for 184 yards. Obviously, that is phenomenal, and one of the best halves you will see out of any quarterback all year. But to go back to the Rams game in Week 8, and this also applies to the Jets game in Week 5, the offense becomes stagnant more often than not after the initial script and after the initial first few drives. The Rams game shows this best, as the Vikings ran 8 plays in the second quarter against the Rams for a total of -4 yards. And if you want to take away the end of the first half sequence, which was 2 total plays as they had the ball on their own 3-yard line to start, then the Vikings would have had 6 total plays ran for -5 yards. And again, this was for an entire quarter. One of the best drive sequences to summarize this up was when the Vikings started the ball on their own 42-yard line. Minnesota called a concept intended to stretch the field horizontally and cause confusion for the Rams, as they had both Justin Jefferson and Addison on dig routes, with Jordan Addison coming in motion pre-snap. They also had Aaron Jones go out of the backfield and tight end Johnny Munt on a delayed drag route. This put tight end Josh Oliver one-on-one with Jared Verse, and I think Verse is well on his way to winning the Defensive Rookie of the Year award, and by the time Sam Darnold gets to the top of his dropback, there is nowhere to go. Everybody is covered, and even if Sam attempted to throw this ball, it probably would have been a strip sack, or maybe in the best case, an incomplete pass that falls short of Johnny on the delayed drag route. I don't want this to come across as, well, Kevin should have did this and be the king of hindsight, because to be honest, I think that's obnoxious, but my point is, the opportunity was there when they started the ball with a 1st and 10 on their 42-yard line and let an opportunity go. Christian Darrisaw had a false start the very next play, and from 1st and 10 on the 42, it became 2nd and 25 on the 27 quickly. Darnold threw an incomplete pass on 2nd down, and on 3rd and 25, the Rams played very soft coverage, and the Vikings picked up 9 yards to have it be 4th and 16, in which they would punt the football back to the Rams. Now, I have several other concerns with the Minnesota Vikings offense, not just in the meantime, but for the remainder of the year, and one of those concerns is Sam Darnold's pressure to sack percentage. Sam Darnold right now is 5th out of 35 eligible quarterbacks at around 25% pressure to sack percentage, and that statistic is as simple as it sounds. For every pressure the defense gets, Sam Darnold is likely to take a sack 25% of the time. And that's concerning because sacks are drive killers, and over the past couple of years, one of the stats that I place more emphasis on more for draft prospects than I ever have is their pressure to sack percentage in college, because if you don't take a lot of sacks in college, whether you throw the ball away, whether you throw the ball at a receiver's feet, whatever the case may be, as long as you don't take that sack, now granted you don't want to force the ball into triple coverage just to not take a sack, but the point is, if you don't take sacks, you keep drives alive, and you don't want to have a 2nd and 18 or a 2nd and 21. Even a 2nd and 15 puts your offense severely behind the sticks, let alone the 2nd and 22s and everything else beyond that. Sam's pressure to sack percentage is high, and the only 4 quarterbacks he's behind right now are Spencer Rattler, and I'm really willing to excuse Spencer Rattler because he wasn't one of the quarterbacks that you thought would be starting by season's end. Now, there were bold predictions entering the season that, hey, maybe Derek Carr plays his way out of a starting job, but the point is, Spencer Rattler was not one of the top 32 quarterbacks back in week 1. The other 3 are Deshaun Watson, who is now out for the year, Baker Mayfield, which kind of surprised me, and Caleb Williams, who is a rookie, and as we know, Caleb Williams likes to extend the play, and that's kind of part of his game. You live and die with the extension of the plays with Caleb Williams, and to be completely honest, Caleb's offensive line isn't as good as Darnold's, and I also expect that to gradually decline over the course of Caleb's rookie year. Right now it's high, maybe it won't decline over the course of his rookie year, but definitely in year 2 and year 3, as they get better along the offensive line and as Caleb develops, I expect that to gradually decline. Now, why this is a big concern for the Vikings and ultimately for Sam Darnold is they just lost Christian Darrisaw, who again was playing at an all-pro level, and to be completely honest, Darrisaw reminds me a lot of a young Trent Williams. Now, I don't know if he's going to have the career path that Trent has in terms of the success that Trent has had over the past, 14 years, but the point is, there is going to be a big drop-off between Christian Darrisaw and 34-year-old David Quessenberry, and I expect the Darnold sack percentage to either remain the same at worst or go up. And that's going to be a problem for the Vikings moving forward because they're already having trouble outscoring opponents over the past couple of weeks because the defense is getting more and more figured out as the season goes on. Now, the defense getting more and more figured out can be attributed to a couple of things, and we'll get to that later. But Darnold getting sacked at 25% of the time is a major concern moving forward. Now, I also have a couple of concerns with this team, and one of them is the usage of second-year receiver Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison had a really good rookie year. He finished top 5 in receiving touchdowns, he had over 900 yards as a rookie, and he had 70 receptions. And if you would have said that that's what he would have had prior to the 2023 season starting, I would have been absolutely thrilled for him and with the production that he had. But he's only played in 5 games as he missed a couple of games earlier in the year in 2024, and he has 14 receptions. And that's not good for a couple of reasons, but it's not because Jordan simply isn't a good football player or that he's not getting open or anything like that. I recently went through his tape and went through a lot of his routes over the past couple of weeks, and I've been frustrated for Jordan because it's been a lot of speed outs, and that's simply not going to get it done in terms of getting your playmakers the football. Whether the receiver is Jordan Addison, whether it's Justin Jefferson, Randy Moss, Jerry Rice, whoever, you're always going to be limited if you continuously run speed out routes. And I'm not exaggerating, there were probably close to double-digit speed out routes against the Lions alone, and it was frustrating to see a player of Jordan Addison's caliber get limited by coaching. Now, that is also one of my frustrations with Kevin O'Connell is Justin Jefferson hasn't had the receptions or the numbers that you would expect from Justin Jefferson to start the year. Yes, he's produced, but it hasn't been those 8 or 9 or 10 catch games that we've been accustomed to in years past. Again, he has produced because he is, to me, the best receiver in football, and I know I may be biased when I say that, but I do think Justin is the best receiver in football. But his production isn't where you probably would think it should be for who he is as a player, and it's because the targets aren't there for JJ either, and in turn they aren't there for Jordan Addison as well. Now, there also seems to be this belief that, oh hey, we have TJ Hawkinson coming back, and TJ's going to free everything up, and we don't have to worry about anything once he comes back. But while that will be nice, I think there's a little bit of a misconception there that just because TJ's coming back, that everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows, and that Jordan Addison will somehow all of a sudden have 5 receptions for 65 yards a game, and that he can be a 1,000-yard player after being a 900-yard receiver in his rookie season. I don't think that's going to help Jordan Addison at all, and in fact, I think that's going to kind of hinder him with TJ coming back, because believe it or not, TJ was a 950-yard receiver himself last year, and if he didn't tear his ACL on Christmas Eve, he probably would have had at least 20 receiving yards in the final 2 games of the season and been a 1,000-yard tight end himself. So I think there's a lot of concerns with the Vikings offense moving forward. The distribution of routes for Jordan Addison is definitely concerning. The assumption that once TJ Hawkinson gets back that everything is going to fall in place, and we all know what happens when you assume, if you know that old saying. And I don't think it's going to be this automatic, let's just eat our cake and we're going to be one of the best offenses in the league again because TJ Hawkinson's back. One other concern that I have not been seeing in the media is Sam Darnold makes good plays occasionally. He really does. Whether it's Sam Darnold, whether it's an MVP candidate, Darnold will make great plays throughout the course of a game, but he will equally make boneheaded decisions, and one of the plays that Darnold's made over the past couple of games was the interception he threw to Brian Branch. First off, that was a tremendous play by Brian Branch, and I don't want Lions fans to think that I'm not crediting Brian Branch for making a tremendous play on the ball from his position, but the Lions were running a cover 1 robber, and what happened was the Vikings were running a post and a deep cross. It's a pretty common route combination you'll see on every Sunday, whether it's the Vikings running it, whether it's the 49ers, the Lions, whoever, you will see this route combination a lot on NFL Sundays, and the reality is Sam just didn't see Brian Branch. They were running a cover 1, and Aaron Jones was as open as he possibly could have been on the backside. Darnold had a clean pocket, and he threw it right to Brian Branch, and you could see Brian Branch running up from behind Jordan Addison, anticipating the throw before Darnold threw it, because again, Sam at times gets locked in and he gets lock-eye, and it's very frustrating because that was an interception before the ball was thrown. Again, tremendous play by Brian Branch, but there's times where Sam Darnold goes back to the 22 or 23-year-old version of himself, locks onto a target, and doesn't scan the whole field, when in this scenario he absolutely could have, and again, he flat out didn't see Brian Branch. So there's a tremendous amount of concern that I have with the Vikings offense moving forward, and I don't think it's going to be all sunshine and rainbows once TJ Hawkinson gets back. There's also chinks in the armor of the Vikings defense, and that's been evident over the past few weeks. The Lions and Rams made quick work of the Vikings defense, and what I think is particularly scary for the Vikings defense moving forward is Ben Johnson and Sean McVay put on a clinic of how to attack this defense that teams couldn't figure out in the first few weeks of the year. During the Week 7 game, the ball hardly touched the ground when Jared Goff was passing, and he's been one of the best quarterbacks all year. Truly, and he deserves to be in the MVP conversation. Goff finished 22 of 25 for 280 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Vikings, and in particular, he was 4 for 4 on throws between 10 and 19 yards of the line of scrimmage for 60 yards. On throws between the numbers at any depth, he was perfect. He was 13 of 13 on throws between the numbers for 209 yards, and I don't know how you can look at this in any other way than acknowledge how concerning this is moving forward. In Week 8, Matt Stafford was 8 of 10 on throws between 10 and 19 yards from the line of scrimmage, with 2 passing touchdowns and an interception. Both quarterbacks had a pass rating of above 115 on throws in this area of the field against Minnesota. That's already bad, but another thing that concerns me with Minnesota is their pass rush outside of Jonathan Grenard. Grenard has been a great addition to this team, and he's been a very fun player to watch over the first 7 games of the year. He has had at least 5 pressures in every game, and you truly could not ask more from him. But outside of Grenard, it's been hit or miss, and in the first few games of the year, specifically after the Texans game, it was fine because Flores was sending pass rushers every which way, and somebody was seemingly always getting home and impacting the quarterback in some way. Whether it was a hurried throw, a quarterback hit, or even forcing the quarterback to throw the ball away, it was fine because the team had allowed just 30 points in the first 3 games of the year, and they were 3-0. And they were 3-0 with 2 20-plus point victories, including a 27-point throttling over the Houston Texans. But over the past few games, there's been more and more chinks in the armor of the Vikings defense. If you are not a serious Vikings fan or a person that follows the NFL closely, to be honest, I wouldn't expect you to be able to name the next few leaders and pressures on this defense after Darnold, and it's because it's Andrew Van Ginkel, who is a great player, and I'll get more to him in a minute, journeyman defensive lineman Jihad Ward, second-year linebacker Ivan Pace, defensive tackle Harrison Phillips, and fourth-year edge rusher Patrick Jones. I think it is worth noting Ivan Pace is a very good linebacker and is a very underrated player, but the rest of these guys are not exactly household names. And sure, Harrison Phillips is a solid player and he's a great dude off the field and does tremendous work in the community, but he's not great and he certainly should not be expected to carry a pass rush. Andrew Van Ginkel is a really smart player and a really tactical player, but I would never confuse him with an elite edge rusher. He's a very good player, but for reference, he has 171 pass rushing snaps on the year and has 97 snaps in coverage. Meaning, if Brian Flores thought he was a great pass rusher, he wouldn't bother having him in coverage as much as he does. Now, for what it's worth, Van Ginkel has 2 pick sixes before the month of November, meaning he was never signed to be a 60 pressure a year player and a guy who could generate 12 or 13 sacks and have opposing offenses fear him. Great player, that's just not his calling card, and you wouldn't expect Myles Garrett or TJ Watt or Micah Parsons to have 3 or 4 interceptions a season either, and it's because of how valuable they are getting after the quarterback. All of this to say the Vikings pass rush isn't very good, at least consistently outside of one player. Yes, Brian Flores does a lot to scheme guys open and to generate pressure, but outside of Jonathan Darnold, there's not really anybody Brian Flores can look at and say, I need you to go get me a pressure right now, go disrupt the play. And there's also a cause for concern within the Vikings fan base about first-round rookie Dallas Turner. The Vikings, of course, selected J.J. McCarthy at 10th overall with their first-round pick, but they also selected Dallas Turner at 17th overall with their second first-round pick. And Dallas right now has played less than 100 total defensive snaps through the first 7 games, and over the last 2 games in particular, he's only played 8 total defensive snaps. Obviously, whenever you don't have your first-round pick contribute right away, unless it's a Michael Penix or a J.J. McCarthy who is going to sit regardless of him unfortunately hurting his knee in the preseason, there's a cause for concern to be midway through their rookie year and to really not see them other than a glimpse here or a glimpse there. Now, with Dallas Turner specifically, I am willing to wait this one out a little bit, and here's why. Dallas was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year last year at 20 years old, and he had over 50 pressures for the Crimson Tide. As we just said, he was 20 last year, meaning he's 21 now, and whenever you go from the collegiate level to the NFL, whether it's from the SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten, or even a non-Power 5 conference, there's going to be an adjustment between the trenches because of how physically demanding the trenches are and how strong guys are at the NFL level. I mean, guys, think about this for a second. Who is going to win a power rush, or who's going to win this rep if Dallas Turner is using a power rush, a speed to power move, a bull rush against a left guard and Quentin Nelson if they run him on an edge tackle stunt? Obviously, Quentin's going to be able to hold up against Dallas, and ironically, the Vikings play the Colts this Sunday, so we may actually get to see that if Brian Flores calls for a stunt. The point is Quentin Nelson's been in the league for a long time. He's 28 years old. He obviously has a lot of muscle mass, and he's been taking these hits for 6 or 7 years, where Dallas Turner is only 21, and generally in the trenches, the older you are, the 26, 27, 28, you are going to be more mature muscle-wise, and you're going to be more prepared for these hits. So I'm not really worried about Dallas Turner at this point in time the way some fans are. I think this pick, along with J.J. McCarthy, who is also only 21 years old, was always meant for the long haul, and it wasn't meant to be a, hey, we need production right now, and if you don't produce right now, then we're going to be out of a job by season's end. So I think Dallas's snaps will gradually get better as the season goes on, and I think he will have a more contributing role in the second half of the year. One other part of the Vikings defense that concerns me is the secondary, specifically at the corner position. Now, on a serious note, the Vikings had a corner go down for the year with a torn ACL before the season started in Mekhi Blackmon, and Kyrie Jackson was their 4th round pick and unfortunately passed away before the season started, which was a tremendous loss for Kyrie's family, and we hope they're doing well to this day as well as they can in what was a tragedy. But from a football standpoint, the Vikings were down 2 corners before the season started, which was always going to put them behind the 8 ball. Now they are trotting out a 35-year-old Stephon Gilmore, who, credit where it's due, has played really well this season, and Byron Murphy is, by pretty much every definition, hot and cold. He will have some games where he looks like he can not be a Pro Bowler per se, but be an above-average starter, and then he has games where he gets picked on left and right. After that, it's Shaquille Griffin, and after that, it's a Caleb Evans, and the Vikings corners are thin, and they're also not the most talented unit in the league, and they're also one of the older units in the league. So when you combine a pass rush that really only has one player that can get home consistently, along with a secondary that was down a couple of corners before the season started, yes, you are going to have a lot of holes in this defense, and it was all protected in the first couple of weeks because of the work Brian Flores was doing. It was also protected due in large part to the work of free agent additions in Blake Cashman and Andrew Van Ginkel, and they were doing a tremendous job whenever everybody was on the field, but it's been a long couple of weeks for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, full transparency, they are 5-2, and the season is not technically over by any means, although if you had to ask if I think there's a chance they win the Super Bowl, I would say no. So in that sense, I do think the Vikings are done in the Super Bowl sense, but what I will say is their next couple of games are against all AFC South teams, and then after the 3 games against the Colts, Jags, and Titans, they play the Bears, who just recently struggled against the Commanders, and I don't think the Commanders' defense is as good as the Vikings, so there is a real chance that the Vikings start out 9-2, despite going through this little 2-game hiccup, and despite struggling by pretty much every definition at the moment. I don't think the Vikings are going to be Super Bowl contenders, but I do think it's fair to say that they are struggling at the moment, and it's going to be interesting to see how they get out of this, because the trade deadline is also coming up, and to be honest, I don't think the Vikings are going to be big buyers and to go all in, and to be honest, I don't think they should be, because the talent on this roster is not where other talented rosters are across the league. I mean, when you look at this defense strictly from a talent standpoint, guys, it's no wonder that the Lions put up over 30 points on this team. The Lions offense is absolutely loaded, and the Vikings are doing everything they can to maximize the talent they have on defense, but when push comes to shove, this roster defensively is not all that talented at the moment. So the Minnesota Vikings are struggling, and I hope they can get out of it, but it's going to be a long road until 2025. Yes, there's going to be some fun times from here to 2025. They might even win 10 or 11 games, especially with how easy their schedule is down the stretch, but in terms of being a true serious contender, I think they may win a playoff game and then get bounced in the divisional round of the playoffs. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as it helps the channel tremendously, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.